Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to my colleague and friend Lasha Kasradze, a geopolitical analyst and liaison officer for Sokhumi State University in the United States. Lasha, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Pascal. It's great to be back.
Thanks for taking the time, because we are seeing now again news coming out of Georgia, although this time they're not as huge as they used to be, but your country, home country, just had elections, not parliamentary ones, but local ones, and there are protests again in Tbilisi on the street. We read in BBC News, Georgia protesters try to storm Tbilisi presidential palace. Can you tell us what happened with the elections and with these protests?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So on the 4th of this month, just yesterday, there took place local elections on municipal level elections, mayoral elections, and the Georgian Dream again won resoundingly. Over 70% of the votes were after counting the 100% of the votes, 70+% went to the Georgian Dream government. But this time it was slightly different and relatively speaking easier for the Georgian Dream government to digest the win, if you will. The opposition has virtually lost all its legitimacy. You cannot call them opposition. Unfortunately, I wish that things were different. I wish there were a healthy sort of an opposition in Georgia, where two parties can challenge each other on legitimate issues. But in this case, there is no opposition in Georgia. It's just a radicalized, deracinated, really a sect or sects, that are willing to basically engage in some absolutist behavior where it's either them or no one else, and they're willing to basically engage in violence and overthrow the government, for which they were calling. Let's just, for the sake of this conversation, call them the opposition. So the opposition rushed, they wanted to rush, and they did, the presidential palace in Tbilisi, and they were openly calling for the overthrow of the government again. And this time, the Georgian Dream Party once again managed to decisively and firmly react and arrest those who were calling for arrests of Georgian Dream officials, and including the honorary chairman of the Georgian Dream Party, Ivanishvili, and the rest of the sort of top 5 members of the Georgian Dream, including the Speaker of the House and the Prime Minister. And these were the people. One of the persons that was calling for this is a famous Georgian opera singer, quite famous in Europe, and he's a tenor. And one of the biggest ironies is that they just try to sort of cling on anyone who wants to criticize GD, because this man has no place in politics. The whole country knows him, and he's no politician. So the question is, how do these people get so radicalized? They're just being bought and sold for, perhaps. But it's so odd to look at some of the figures in the Georgian politics, some of the personalities, and think that they can be politicians. It's ridiculous. But be that as it may, yes, they rushed the presidential palace, and nothing came of it. They're all in jail currently. I'm not sure to what extent the law will be applied to them. They might be let go because of their status and fame, and because but depends on. I don't know the details in terms of them committing or individually committing what kind of crimes they committed, what they were calling for. But the allegations are that they were calling for the overthrow of the government, which, in my opinion, is a pretty serious charge if it sticks.
Yeah, and just let me throw in here, because the BBC report, I'm quoting from BBC, say that the government said that the government said 21 police officers and 6 protesters were taken to hospital. So there is violence, and the BBC actually claims that tens of thousands of protesters marched in central Tbilisi. Can you confirm that? Although you're in the United States,
I cannot collaborate on that, but I highly doubt. Everyone I've spoken to in Georgia, there were no tens of thousands of people out in the streets. There were maybe a few thousand. But again, this was probably the least powerful resistance given all the rest of the previous protests during parliamentary elections in the past. This was probably the weakest effort that the opposition put forth. And it was over relatively quickly. This is almost 48 hours now that have passed. The Georgian Dream has decisively won these elections. I have not heard any continuation of the process, the resistance, so to speak.
And again, this was just the local elections. I mean, they wouldn't change the configuration in parliament anyhow, but they were used by these opposition forces in order to again stage these attacks and kind of make themselves heard, probably in Europe more than in Tbilisi. And the BBC actually still frames the entire situation by saying the Caucasus country has been in crisis since the ruling Georgian Dream Party claimed victory in last year's election, which the pro-European Union opposition says was stolen. Okay, the framing is very clear, right? Georgia is under an illegitimate government since last year, and everything is going down, and Georgia is going this authoritarian
fourth time. This is the fifth time. Just to interrupt, sorry to interrupt, but this is the fifth time
they had won.
Yeah.
Okay. And now the local elections are being used again to stir up trouble, right?
Correct.
But overall, now the mood you're saying, and what we're seeing with the 70 to 80% approval rating of the Georgian Dream actually is quite clear inside the country, I suppose.
Yeah. Let me just make a few comments on that. What's happening under Georgian Dream government is quite unprecedented. We've had the ultranationalist Zviad Gamsakhulia, who tragically died, sort of the beloved son of Georgia still. Everybody loves him. Then we had Shevardnadze. And then we had Saakashvili, the United National Movement, directly supported by the neocons and neoliberals in Washington and Brussels, who was basically turned into an autocrat and his henchmen and that regime that ran the country for 9 years just did some awful, horrible things, all under the banner of democracy and Rose Revolution and all that. And now we have the Georgian Dream. Now, what is the difference? The difference is that the Georgian Dream government has managed two things. It has managed to withstand sort of the dying pressure, which was still enormous, coming out from Washington, to open up the second front, to go to war basically against Russia and defend Ukraine. It managed to withstand that pressure. It managed to withstand the pressure from NGOs. So the entire sort of concert, the system of the neocon sort of a propaganda machine, it withstood against it. And the second thing that it did was it has managed to preside over economic growth in Georgia and stability. It created social and economic stability in relative terms. And in parallel, just like I mentioned, it persevered through enormous pressure, I would say sort of the last of it before Trump came to power, and they survived it. So now what they're doing is there is actual, genuine, in my view, effort to fight corruption. And then now they're looking inward to take care of serious issues that will advance their political message, not necessarily the continuation of sort of using the past as the reason to keep them in power, but now that they've actually strengthened their legitimacy, so the political vertical is being strengthened. This is that they have managed to do this. Now they're looking, in my opinion, inward to basically satisfy the electorate, to basically deliver as much as they can on the promise of anti-corruption. So there is a genuine, I believe, observing their politics right now with the current prime minister, there is genuine effort now to look into some of the problems that GD has always been sort of tainted by. Corruption, in my view, has been a problem. Now, every government, we can discuss that, and there are no angels in any government. But what I'm saying is there is a genuine effort that's taking place, and this is their way, sort of, to show that, look, we have to shift gears now from sort of blaming everyone else, or legitimately so, if you ask me, the United National Movement and their Neocon supporters, and how the European Union was always, on their case. So now that they have, with this local elections, the perception is that they have finally sort of managed to secure their power, and they're going to use it to look into some of the problems internally. If that happens, and if they successfully prevail, and if they at least create sort of fact-based investigations and show to the rest of the population that the GD sort of cares, and GD works towards betterment of and bringing in good governance and in betterment of the society, I think that will go a long way towards further legitimization. The problem they're facing, though, is that there is no healthy opposition in the country. That's a problem. They even they admit, they said that they wish there were a healthy, sort of organically grown domestic opposition who can challenge us on things that they don't like. The society has sort of whatever problems that have accumulated politically, whoever can grab on those issues and challenge us democratically, in a healthy, sort of rational manner, democratic manner. That's so. Hopefully now the society is turning into this, turning the corner, if you will, to the possibly next stage of GD's governance, because they're the only legitimate party in the country. Because again, they're up other parties, but they stand no chance. They cannot even get their 5% threshold. They cannot even pass that.
We have a 5% threshold for parliament. Okay.
All right. But now they did let few other sort of marginal parties into city councils under this election, if I'm not mistaken. But there is no sort of a serious political sort of democratic challenge coming from a really domestically grown political party that can come about. So that's a challenge for GD. And they are openly admitting it. They're openly saying it, that they need a legitimate opposition, but never the type of opposition that the Brussels supports and Washington supports.
Now, not this fake foreign sponsored kind of millions of dollars through NGO funding into some transatlantic kind of opposition that is. Well, that's poison. That's a poison pill. Although, I mean, we must accept, like, people who honestly, genuinely subscribe to that kind of agenda are also out of there, right? I mean, obviously, they are not illegitimate in the sense that their opinions should not be valued. But the problem is when they get over when they overpower the system, right, and then start wreaking havoc the way that 2014 was, like, pivotal and horrible for Ukraine, right? It's when these forces do take over, even against the will and the wish of the majority of a country.
Correct. Exactly. And the fact that that side of history is disappearing slowly, or is being reduced to the point where they can no longer threaten sort of represent existential threat to the Georgian government. Now they're sort of starting to address, basic sort of everyday standard issues that any government, any society deals with. Economics, a little bit of corruption, allegations of corruption. And look, I really commend the current Prime Minister of Georgia, Irakli Kobakhidze, for talking about this openly, and they're calling for severe punishment for anyone who either is caught up in corruption or will be corrupt in the future, or there are some strict investigations that are expected to start. But so in other words, they survived the political turmoil. They survived enormous pressure from the West, and not only that, but they're sort of looking inward to figure out a way how to sort of, improve even more the lives of, the electorate and just Georgian society in general.
And so let's say the height of this wave probably was last year in December, right? When we had this standoff between Surabishvili and her NGO Western supporters, and then things did calm down, and this was the height when the government had to stand, and it did. And in the meantime, you now have all of these year-long preparations in order to get out these foreign influences, including this transparency law that just requires any NGO to declare funding, period.
Correct.
Like if more than 25 or 30% comes from abroad.
Yeah.
Right. So that one on the one hand, and on the other hand, we also have Donald Trump, who dismantled USAID. And although not the entire power of the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, is gone, it did hamper quite a few programs. So do you have any examples of things that changed since the USAID funding was cut?
The opposition and the NGO sector, they're all in disarray. They are very upset. They don't know what to do. They're looking for, actually, the German ambassador to Georgia met with the government, the current, the prime minister, I believe it was, and I think it was the prime minister, but it was one of the highest officials in the government, and he openly asked them to give German NGOs a waiver from this law, which is sort of the equivalent of FARA in the States, right? The NGO law that the government very wisely implemented and pushed through the parliament. So just think about that. There is not only do we know that there have been open calls for the overthrow of this government by foreign officials, including some of the ambassadors of foreign countries in Georgia, including the German ambassador, if I'm not mistaken. But they're now behind the scenes try to sort of see if they can pull some strings to get some exceptions and waivers for, in this case, German NGOs. I didn't even know there were German NGOs in Tbilisi. But, when we talk about Western NGOs, why shouldn't there be?
Look, German NGOs are downstream US NGOs, like the German Marshall Fund and well, anyhow, but it's quite hilarious to think about this. Hey, like, dear Georgian government, could you please give us an opt-out on your transparency law? We want transparency, but not for our guys. We would love transparency for the other guys.
This is the absurdity that they basically did themselves in with such behavior. I mean, Georgians are looking at them and saying, look, we've done everything we could. We probably prevailed, even though we're still not out of the woods. But what are you guys doing with this absurdity? I mean, you're drowning in your own propaganda. You really are tying your own hands, where you're just simply not making any more sense. And then the other thing was one of the most scandalous sort of social news was how this same, I think, Brussels was trying to sort of blackmail the current Georgian government by telling them that if they don't accept the same-sex marriage, that put it in the constitution that they were going to cancel Georgian citizens' right to travel freely, sort of free visa travel to Europe. I think as I speak, they're still deciding on what to do with that. Just imagine, but basically openly are calling for sociocultural transformation, political transformation. We know that, and for they have called for opening up the second front and jeopardizing Georgia's security and sort of increasing sort of existential threats to Georgia, and so. You see on all three fronts, miraculously, I think the Georgian Dream government has prevailed. And no one has done that. Shevardnadze went down because of corruption. Saakashvili's madness really finally did him in. Even the Americans wiped their hands off of him. And now these guys have sort of prevailed through a huge transformation, and maintained stability, maintained relative economic growth. I think they still have to tread very carefully, but I think with Trump in the White House, that has helped a lot also.
Yeah, although
Perhaps indirectly, but yeah, it has.
I mean, we're let's look outside a little bit, or like take a viewpoint from Georgia to the near abroad, because in my view, we've seen now a massive shift. I mean, the neocon establishment basically having given up, not completely, but understood that Georgia is probably would be very tough to keep working on. So they shifted on the one hand successfully to Moldova, because that one seems to be going straight down the route that was supposed there to be for Georgia, into the fold, right, and into even like successfully interfered elections where the foreign Moldovan diaspora in Europe had like over 300 polling stations, whereas the foreign diaspora in Russia had 2, and even the Transnistrian minority being disenfranchised and so on. So this kind of election. Not election meddling, but it's, in my political science classes, I usually say democracy is not in the voting, it's in the counting. So to make sure that you count only the votes that you want to count, right? And the other ones you make sure you don't have to bother with. And that's now a European value. And on the other hand, the other fault line that's developing is, of course, in your south, right? Armenia and Azerbaijan. Can we talk about these two theaters, please?
Absolutely. Well, with Moldova, I'll just give you my standard story on that. I haven't followed it in too much detail, but Sandu, I think her name, right? Yeah. Well, the accusations are that basically Brussels helped her win directly, and they're not going anywhere anyway. I think they got Transnistria, they got Gagauzia there, Turkic ethnic minority that is pro-Russian, this is sort of the last-ditch effort, in my view, from the extremists, in Brussels, that viscerally hate Russia, to cling on any country, any little small Soviet space, if you will, former Soviet space, if you will, that can further complicate things for Moscow, and they just continually are failing. Not to mention how they, just like to allude to what you said, how they've really, really devastated the idea of democracy. Here it is, the West, correct? The idea that it comes from the West, that we should respect the rules-based international order and human rights and democracy and good governance and rule of law. All of that has been flushed down the toilet. Pardon my French. Actually, what you just said, I've been told on numerous occasions. I've been asked. They said, "Lasha, what happened to you?" Because when I came to this country 30 years ago, that was not Europe that I remembered. There were a lot of things that I could admire about Europe. It was immediately after post-Soviet Soviet Union had just collapsed, and everybody sort of was rejoicing. And here it was this sort of Atlanticist mood, where this new liberal West was coming in, trying to save all these backward countries, and bring them and drag them into some sort of a civilized, human rights based, or political systems. Everybody. So there was such a radical difference now that we think sort of with a mental image. Now we are seeing factually what actually the collective West had been about. Because when things get tough, they completely ignore their own values, their own standards, but the irony here is no matter how much they do that, they still don't know what to do with Russia. They still don't have much resources, even when they're saying that they're going to start buying $100 billion worth of weapons from Washington. And what are they going to do? What collective Europe is going to go to war with mainland Russia, with Moscow? So I think Anatol Lieven also has written about this, the absurdity of it, and the danger of it, this kind of a rhetoric. But and yet here we are witnessing it all. But the dynamic, though, if you read between the lines, I think, at least towards Georgia, they've realized that they're just not sustainable things as usual, business as usual. And so, again, with this win and with the relative ease with which the Georgian Dream, won these elections, it sort of presents a small example that this is basically the crazies have run out of resources, or they're pretty close to.
Yeah, I think the most dangerous thing to the neocon side of world politics is actually that Georgia could become a success model. The first kind of we got away, and by the way, we didn't get away by being pro-Russian. We got away by being pro-Georgian, because let's remember, Georgia still has no diplomatic relations with Russia and is still in a territorial conflict with Russia. This Georgian Dream government is anything but pro-Russian, but it is pro-Georgia and really firmly, in this sense, neutralist, right? And that's exactly what these people are fighting against in Moldova, because the Moldovan opposition, which always said we just want to remain neutral, are being tainted as pro-Russian. And Georgia kind of successfully didn't go that route. So question for the Moldovan opposition is how to emulate the successes of Georgian Dream, basically.
And I believe this truly, that I mentioned this before. Never have they ever said that they don't want the West, or they're turning away from the West. They say, guys, we're waiting. What are you waiting for? Here we are, the Georgian Dream. We are waiting. We've done everything you've told us. We've implemented basically all the requirements that you've given us. We won every case against the previous government in your courts, from Strasbourg to God knows where else, in your courts. We basically have conducted democratic elections and won every single one of them, without any proof that en masse elections were faked. So so I've always said, look, if the West had been truly prepared to accept Georgia as a member of Security and Economic Club, there wouldn't be any government official in Georgia willing or able to resist that. They would just lose their career. They would be kicked out of the country. They just wouldn't be able to resist, because there is no, right? So imagine if Washington or Brussels had made up their minds that Georgia or Ukraine were going to go into NATO. 100%. That's it. There would be no opposition to that in Tbilisi. This is that's why this whole process is absurd, to accuse Georgia that they're pro-Russian. But that also which also shows that they don't care whether you survive or not. They don't care, because they're not preparing you for their membership in their own exclusive clubs. They're preparing you for some sort of partisan warfare country, state, territory. Yeah,
they want a tool in the toolbox. They
just a tool in the
want a member in the club.
Correct. But here is, and I've also alluded something, I've said this many times, I just briefly mentioned this, with Trump's new plan. I think the shortened version is called TRIP.
Well, the Zangezur corridor, yeah.
The Zangezur corridor trip. I mean, it's very innovative. It's radically different, obviously, from the Atlanticist involvement of Washington in the South Caucasus, right? The Atlanticist part is absent, which is great. So this is very practical, very Trumpian. He wants his Nobel Prize, Mr. Trump. So he tries to go ahead.
Just the proposal is to connect the eastern part of Azerbaijan, which has to travel through a part of Armenia.
Zangezur corridor. On the other side is
on the other side. There's the enclave, right? Connect those two, which then connect to Turkey and so on, and connect those with a strip of basically a highway, right? Under U.S. administration, which very coincidentally also is right at the border with Iran. I can't see any kind of problem arising from that fact that you basically now have a US 99-year lease, although this is what's in the plan that has not gone yet through the Armenian parliament, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So this is something that actually Trump wants personally. This is also very innovative, and this. If you recall the whole theory and concept of South Caucasus being used as a bridge between major powers without actually tearing it apart through wars and instigations, right? This is this closest that it could theoretically get to that concept, where the South Caucasus could be used as a geoeconomic, geopolitical space, where both the United States, Europe, and then the 3+3, right? So the South Caucasian, all three South Caucasian states, Turkey, Iran, and Russia could sort of coexist. Mm-hmm. Now, I hear a lot about, is Russia losing the South Caucasus? And I really fundamentally disagree with those titles or concepts, because Russia is not losing the South Caucasus. This is mostly these projects are strictly geoeconomic projects. We know from almost 30 years ago that when Bill Clinton met with Shevardnadze and Aliyev Sr., who was a very wise leader, and when they implemented those geoeconomic TBC, the Tbilisi Geoecon, oil pipelines and other geoeconomic pipelines, they basically isolated Russia and they put Azerbaijan and Georgia on the map. So Russia couldn't do anything with those geoeconomic plans. The same sort of reality is taking place, sort of repeating itself today. If Trump succeeds and finds the wherewithal to sort of move through and complete this project, then this will be yet another attempt, it is true, to isolate Russia. But in terms of geoeconomic projects, Russia can acquiesce to those. It doesn't mean that Russia is losing the South Caucasus, because really there is no existential security threat that emanates out of the South Caucasus at the present time against Russia, because Russia really nipped it in the bud when it first invaded Georgia as a result, in order to stop NATO expansion in the middle of the South Caucasus. When it did that in 2008, and Georgia being the first country who actually experienced that, Russia basically strategically stopped any threat coming out of South Caucasus, existential threat. And then they found Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine came in 2014. So now that represents an existential threat, much more so than, I would argue, Georgia for Russia. And and as a result of that, we're seeing to what extent and how far Russia is willing to go.
Yeah.
So I think this remains to be a strictly geoeconomic project, and not some mechanism with which to shave off South Caucasus yet again from Russia, or try to.
Are you sure, though? Isn't Azerbaijan a prime contender for, the next, being made the next outpost for this kind of geopolitical pressure making on Russia. I mean, with the Zangezur corridor and the connection then to Turkey, then the next logical step to me would to extend NATO membership to Azerbaijan and say, like, why don't you join the club, right? And basically encircle from below. Okay, you don't have Georgia in the mix, but well enough. I mean, you can stage pressure, even military pressure, also on Georgia from that kind of setup, especially since Armenia now has been basically neutered. And as we had in a different talk with our colleague Pietro Shakarian, basically prepared for dismemberment. Isn't Azerbaijan a real next potential hotspot?
I would say no, Pascal, and let me explain why. Because if Azerbaijan is perceived to be perhaps inaccurately stated, but an ally of Turkey, right? It was under Turkish and Erdogan's help that Azerbaijan won the Second Karabakh War, first in 2020, then in 2023. Okay, so Turkey is NATO. And I think there was a rumor, I believe, that Turkey was going to place its troops, basically, NATO troops on Azerbaijani soil. And Kremlin made this very fleeting, very sort of cynical reaction saying, have you guys forgotten Georgia, or have you forgotten the past, or are we going to go through this again? Some sort of a cynical, in other words, they're so certain that they won't allow this to happen, that it's not even, for them, it's not even worth commenting on. So Erdogan knows this perfectly well. Erdogan also plays a very balancing role vis-a-vis Ukraine. Yes, it has provided some drones and some weapons to Ukraine, but it never upset the fundamental balance with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so, I think that the idea here is through Iran to dismember Iran, because northern Iran has Azerbaijani minority, which, by the way, the West has not been able to convert, because that minority is historically and very well etched into the Iranian culture and politics and economics. And so creating some sort of a separatist nationalist movement there has basically, they have failed to do it. It's become impossible. Contrary to some of the propaganda that you hear, that undoubtedly Iran is concerned about it, but they've tried too many times, and they just have failed, because that minority, Azeri minority in Iran, is very deeply etched. They're assimilated throughout history and throughout decades and centuries within the Iranian culture. So turning that into some sort of a separatist movement against Iran, I think, has failed.
Yeah, and just very quickly to add to that, I have a close Azeri Iranian friend who's thoroughly anti-Tehran regime, but when the recent attacks happened, he said, like, look, even I have to admit now that they were right in saying, like, we're being prepared for dismemberment. I mean, if anything, the recent 12-day war actually made the case of the government, even to the Azeri minority, saying, like, okay, we have a problem as a nation. So the fronts right now are rather hardening in that sense, right, against this kind of foreign interference also in the Iranian borderlands, is the argument you're making, eh?
Correct. So the argument is, so are they going to dismember through Israel? Are they going to dismember Iran? And then Iran has the same problem with Kurds as Turkey has. And this is one of the things that Iran and Turkey are to sort of support each other on. So to what extent does Turkey need another major headache, is another question in terms of, the Kurdish minority issue, which, again, they share with Iran. And then, of course, there is Moscow, there is Russia, in tandem with Iran. And I think we know that Russia won't allow any dismemberment of Iran. Russia will acquiesce to maybe lesser control of Zangezur corridor. It's virtually been sort of marginalized. So will Iran, perhaps. But when it comes to, I think, security and if Trump, for example, there would be a huge mistake if Trump decides or succumbs to neocon pressure and sort of starts to militarize this very shrewd geoeconomic project. So if they start to station troops there, and if Moscow senses that this is much more than just a strategic sort of geoeconomic project, then all hell will break loose, and we will see the sort of repeat of what happened in 2008 in Georgia. Russia still has 3,000 troops in Gyumri in Armenia. That Armenia still considers as a major buffer against Turkey.
Wait, can you explain that again? I didn't know about this. There's 3,000 Russian troops on Armenian territory.
Yeah, on mainland Armenia in Gyumri, and they are stationed. They have been there since the collapse, or since before the collapse of the Soviet Union, during the late 80s, 90s, when the First Karabakh War happened and all that. So, but this is for Armenia, even ironically speaking, they consider these troops to be sort of a protection barrier against possible Turkish invasion or Turkish adventurism in Armenia, which makes this so, in a way, absurd, because here you have Armenia, who's been fighting to preserve its sovereignty via Nagorno-Karabakh, loses Nagorno-Karabakh completely. Neither the West nor Russia does anything to prevent it from happening. And now the West calls Armenia, well, just forget the past, forget Nagorno-Karabakh, and collect whatever is left of you, and maybe we can try to bring you into the West from a different angle. That's not going to work either. So
and collect what is left of you, collect the rest in the form of selling a very important stretch of land for 99 years to the United States, leasing it, right? It's like, okay, Armenia, you're really being taken apart bit by bit, and you're asked to accept it, and the Aliyev just does so. Like, Armenia is really difficult to understand at the moment, other than that this guy is completely, utterly in the pocket of outside.
Well, they're saying that he's very erratic, Pashinyan, and he's saying, they're saying that he's no Aliyev. He's got no sort of strategic sort of patience. Just his temperament is different, and he thinks that through trade and through connection with making amends, quote unquote, with Turkey, Armenia will. Armenia is in a very difficult spot historically. Has been a landlocked country, so I understand completely sort of strategic need to get involved in trade and get access to the Mediterranean and to Europe, to Western Europe, and sort of to get involved, to export or to import and deal with Western markets. But it's barely that, if you ask me personally, because security-wise, Russia is not worried about Armenia. Let's be honest here. Security-wise, Russia, the West, Trump understands this. Brussels understands this. That there is no repeat of Georgia in Armenia. They're not going to keep. They're not going to bring up the issue of Armenia sort of. Ukrainization of Armenia or its potential membership in NATO, right? So it's absurd. So what's left is to offer Armenia some sort of a geoeconomic, throw some sort of a geoeconomic trade issue, a bone, so that they won't completely become succumb to Russia. Clearly, Azerbaijan is a clear winner here so far. But I don't see any security threat emanating from these developments in the South Caucasus. I just see a more innovative foreign policy, which I've been saying. I said, look, if the United States, the story so far, the propaganda-based story has been that it's only the United States that will save the South Caucasus or will bring peace and security and will defend these republics against Russia. Nothing turned out to be further from the truth, right? So now the irony here is, I've always asked this whenever I would get a chance. What if America is blocked off? What if the Washingtonian politics is sort of blocked off. In that case, will the South Caucasus achieve more or less stability, more or less prosperity? And I think the obvious answer here is, ironically, that yes, it will achieve more stability without America's meddling the way that it did meddle. Not the way that Trump is trying to meddle, but if Trump sort of turns it into the security competition,
Yeah.
as a result of pressure, say, from Israel against Iran, right? Then we are back to square one. But so far, it seems to me that this is just mostly lacking that transatlanticist feel. It doesn't have that. This is just a geoeconomic project. So we'll see what happens. But it will be a huge mistake if Washington tries to sort of militarize this.
I hope you're right. Just like my fear is that the easiest thing to do is that in the final document, of this trip plan, that you put in a little asterisk, and the asterisk leads to a footnote that says, oh, by the way, security to this road will be provided by US military. So
yes.
that you can make the entire strip one long thousands of US military personnel kind of staging ground, and any kind of such strip of land can be easily used for landing of airplanes and so on and so forth. If that happens, that would change everything. As long as it remains a real trade route, okay, fine. And actually, if Armenia really wanted to secure its position, it would actually put in a clause that says we have a right to build a tunnel underneath and connect to Iran that way, and connect actually all the way to Russia. That would be the safest way of making sure that you're valuable to everybody. I cannot see that happening. But we probably have to look at the final outcome, if this is going to be, if security is going to be provided by Armenian capacities or by, and I think it will be US. There will be a clause that says the US will provide security.
Right. Right. I think they will sort of they will use Iran as an excuse.
Yeah.
We have to dismember Iran. For that, we'll need some security presence, military presence, and they will kick off sort of further complications of relations with Russia.
So my worries is that this is a poison pill in preparation for the Armenians, another one. But if you're right and it remains economical only, that would be very hopeful indeed. Yeah.
I think also China plays an enormous role in this, and India, and I think also the SCO summit, the recent the Shanghai Cooperation Summit that took place, also had a huge impact on further balancing against hubris coming out of Washington. We all know that India needs the Jabahar port and Iran to go north through Russia, Central Asia into Europe. It's that way. It's balancing its foreign policy against Pakistan. So given the origins of sort of regional politics, foreign policy of India and relations with Pakistan, India tries to sort of use Iran as an ally, if you will, to develop economic infrastructure. And China is also looking at the region as a go through to European markets. So to what extent? And then obviously we know Trump's disposition towards China. But given China, given India, given Russia's collective interests, I think the West, United States, will use Pakistan for their own ends to sort of return, if you will, to Afghanistan. By the way, Afghanistan's loss has been a strategic loss. That's the way it is being viewed in Washington. So can Pakistan aid Washington through Afghanistan? That's another story, perhaps, for the next episode that we can do. But those dynamics, I think, sort of increase that strategic significance of Eurasia, right?
Yeah.
Sort of the common idea of Eurasia as a balance against the West. So this mosaic is too complex for just militarizing the region as Washington sort of wishes for it. But it will kick off. I hope Trump doesn't make the same mistake, because right now what's happening is what has been sort of what has been sort of a part and parcel of how this region can be used, which is use it for geoeconomic projects, trade, and try to build diplomacy that way, right? So we got regional powers that have been there for much longer than Russia, than the United States. But then, sure, U.S. and EU are welcome also, but not through militarization, because that's the most effective way to actually use this region without upsetting Russia or the regional balance.
Your word in God's ear, my friend, and Allah's ear and Buddha's ear and Vishnu's ear as well. I mean, we can use all of those ears, but
it's a lot of ears to.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the crazies and so on in Washington and Brussels, they unfortunately they play on the other ears, right? So I'm pretty sure there's people with other designs, but that would be a very hopeful one. Is there anything that we haven't covered yet that we need to still speak about of how in late 2025 the South Caucasus is working?
No, I think what's happening is that we're seeing the contours of separation of the region from this madness of international sort of liberal hegemony, liberal internationalism, and if not complete separation, at least very effective balancing against it. To a large extent, or to some extent, Mr. Trump deserves credit for this, even though he himself is caught up with under the pressure of neocons in Washington. We see this through Israel, right? We see this on Iran. But overall, I think Trump's presidency on the strategic balance sheet, if you will, for this region has had more assets than losses, if I can put it in those simplistic terms.
Although I also must say, like, everybody's now waiting for the second round of the US-Israel-Iran war. And what that will bring with it is anyone's guess, because last time we saw how Azerbaijan started cooperating as a military.
There would be a disaster if that happens. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, word on the block is that everybody's waiting for it. I hope it won't, but it would change the what you just described again.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
All right, Lasha. People who want to read more from you, they should go to
The Realist Review, Acura, one of the latest, the large piece that I wrote about the Megobari Act that, by the way, failed in Washington in the Helsinki Commission. They can read that article there.
Okay, I will put links to some of your publications into the description below, and we will talk soon again.
And of course, the neutrality studies, so they can also see that on yours.
Oh yeah, neutrality. You find his writings also on neutrality studies, my friend.
Sure. Yes, that's that.
Lasha Kasradze, thank you very much for your time today.
Pascal, thank you for having me.